So we are attempting to make this cute little tiger. And so when we're learning a new technique, it makes the most sense to learn a new technique by all doing the same thing together, and then we can explore different topics after that. So in your wool, I move mine. What I did is I rolled up in your bigger piece the smaller pieces. So what we're looking for right now is for you to take all those that were tucked in the roll to the side, and we want the bigger piece of wool here. It's white, so we're using it as the core. So it's what's going inside of it, okay? Now, needle felting is all about poking the fibers until they're firm enough. So the key is arranging the fibers as close as you can and rolling them as tight as you can so you have less poking to do, okay? So what you're gonna do is we're making his body. So if we look at his body, if we take the head and the legs, we're not looking at that, it's like a cylinder, okay? Do you guys kind of see that? Like if I were to cut his head off, we've just pretty much got a cylinder. So most animal bodies are pretty cylindrical. So I'm going to make sure my wool is fluffed out into a rectangle, and then I'm gonna very tightly roll it up. So as it gets too long, I'm gonna tuck those ends in and continue rolling. How many of you have ever rolled up a sleeping bag? It's kind of like that, where we're getting that. So I want to take my wool and I want to get a tight little roll there.
Miss Lil,
Yes.
are we supposed to have 2 pieces of white?
You should actually have 3 pieces of white. 1 big one and 2 smaller ones. And if I messed up the count, there were some kits from the group that started last week.
I have these.
You have what?
I have these too.
Let me scroll over to your screen. Yeah, you want the one in your right hand.
Okay,
for the body.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Delilah, were you with us last week? I can't remember. No, okay. So I'm going to go and I'm going to review everything for you real quick. So in your kit, you have a sponge. Inside of the sponge is where we store the needles. So you can go ahead and pull those out carefully. They're very sharp. And I gave you some alcohol pads. It's always a good idea to just clean up the needles before you use them each day. Just because if you end up poking those into your skin, you don't want to poke germs in there. So the needles are really sharp, and we're using sheep's wool. And sheep's wool is really special because it's a very rough fiber. If you were to look at it under the microscope, it would be kind of like barbed and not smooth. Go ahead, Tammy. Stan was falling over. All right, so we've got our needles. We've cleaned them off. We're all safe. We've got our big piece of white. So it was the biggest piece in there. So when you got your kit, I know a couple of people just joined us. I had all the wool kind of rolled up. The biggest white piece, this is your body piece, okay? And the tiger body is pretty much like a little cylinder. So we're taking that
piece. I only have 1 white piece.
Yeah. So what we're doing is, in order to have to needle the least amount, which it's relaxing, but it's tedious, we want to roll this really tightly. So we're starting at the end of our biggest white wool, and we're rolling it tightly. Now, I don't want my tiger to be that long because I want him to be proportionate. So if it gets too long, I'm going to just tuck in those pieces and continue to roll. And I'm going to roll it all the way till it's the end. I'm going to set it on my sponge, and I'm going to stab it with a needle. Okay? So the reason I gave you 2 needles was so that our fingers can stay clear of the poking area. So we use our helper needle to stab it and hold it where we don't want to get our fingers close. So anytime you're starting a piece like this body piece, we want to start with a helper needle. We're going to take our other needle and we're going to begin to poke. You only need to poke from the end to here. Any deeper of a poke, and it's not going to do anything because that's the only part. So like one of these ends is going to be his behind, and one is going to be like his chest. So his behind should kind of be rounded, right? So wherever you poke, it's going to tighten the fibers. So if you poke a lot in one spot, it's going to make that spot really tight. So I want to poke, and then I'm going to poke all along the body, and I'm kind of evenly spacing my pokes. Then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to poke a little bit. And what you're going to notice is that as you poke it, it's going to tighten up. And if you want to, you could even remove your helper needle, and it's not going to unroll. So if I'm poking on his, this is going to be his butt end. I don't know how else to say it kinder, his rear end. So I'm going to hold it at his chest end while I'm poking on the rear end. So once I don't need my helper needle, I can use my fingers, but I'm keeping my fingers well away from where I'm poking. And you'll also notice that I hold it with like my fingernails down. So that way, if I do get too close, my fingernails kind of act as a shield. And anywhere you've got like loose wispy fibers, you're just going to poke them in. And so what we want to do is we want to get a nice body shape. We're just making that nice and rounded. Okay. So now, if I've got his rear end kind of shaped about how I think I want it, I need to shape his chest. So the chest is going to kind of come up, but it's going to kind of come to a point where his neck is that we're going to attach the head, right? So it's going to get kind of like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect my piece and see which way I want it to be the top and which way I want it to be the bottom. Mine actually ended up with a nice little curve here. And so what I like about that curve is that it kind of reminds me how like if a dog or a cat, they're standing, their back kind of curves down like that. I'm going to switch to my darker sponge just because I think you'll be able to see better. Is that helpful? You can see a little bit better. All right. So I like that guy. So now I'm going to work on his chest. So I'm thinking about his chest should be nice and rounded as well, but in a different way. It should kind of slope up gently, kind of to where the neck is. Where we're going to attach the head, we want to leave it a little bit softer. So I'm poking, I'm holding it way back at the opposite end. And it's not about like getting your anger out. It's more about like meditating through this repetitive motion. Kind of gently poking. And so I kind of am happy with this.
Are we supposed to like be poking a lot where his head is?
So where his head's going to be attached, once we make it, we want to leave it a little bit softer. And then we want to poke mostly in the other places. But we're kind of working on getting that shape kind of how we want it. So you'll notice a lot of times I'm rolling my piece around to different sides so that I'm poking in different sides.
So I kind of think mine's kind of like long for some reason.
So pick the end that you don't like as much and fold it over and then just stab it a lot to stick it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Like if I felt like this guy was hanging out, I could just fold it over. Because we're going to be putting another layer on the outside. with the orange. And so we've got a lot of flexibility there. All right. How is everyone doing? All right. And make sure you never look at me if you're still poking. So always stop poking. Looks like I'm seeing some really good tiger bodies
Is this what
here.
it's supposed to look like?
Yes, you got it. I know it doesn't look like much of anything right now, but I promise you it will turn into a tiger. Jared, that looks great. All right. So now we're going to start on his head. So the head is kind of like a elliptical shape. It's not quite a circle. It's more ovular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my body to the side. And what you should have are two kind of equal pieces of white. If I missed one, I don't know. Sometimes I get distracted when I'm doing it and I might not have. Put one to the side, that's going to be your legs. And the other piece is going to be your head. If you only got a head piece, no worries. You just may have to stop by the art room and grab more white to make the head.
Miss Bill,
Yes.
it seems like I had a lot of white on my other chunk, so I think it's just the two pieces stuck together.
Gotcha. So yeah, you could pull some off to take into your head if it wasn't fully poked. You can also actually cut it with scissors if it's already poked too much. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, so the head, we're rolling like a ball. So you're gonna start at the end and you're gonna kind of wrap and tuck and roll and tuck and roll and tuck and roll. So you're kind of like really trying to get like a mini cylinder, I guess. Okay. And then once I get him where I want, I'm going to stab him through and hold his head there. So if we look at a tiger's face, it's going to have some variation here, whether our tiger is sitting like my guy or if he's standing. Standing tigers, their heads tend to stay even with their body. They tend to come along straight. I meant to print some pictures, I forgot. And their nose kind of points down. But if he's sitting, their neck kind of comes up. But regardless, their muzzle at the end here gets a little bit skinnier and they're a little rounder there. So first thing we need to do is poke it just enough that it's not going to fall apart. So I'm just going to gently poke it all around. It's got my helper needle in there. And enough that it's not going to fall apart. And then I'm going to do some inspecting. And I'm going to see if the way that I folded it naturally, for me, it was skinnier on this guy. I'm going to make this his nose. And this is where it's going to attach. So this part where it's going to attach, I'm going to not needle it as much because I'm going to needle it when I attach it. And I don't want it to get too tight. Okay. So I am still going to use a helper needle, but I'm not going to stab it all the way into the sponge. I'm going to kind of leave it right in his brains so I can tilt him back and forth. So to make the muzzle smaller, I have to poke it more. And what's important with needle felting when you're doing a sculptural piece is to make sure you're rotating it enough. Because if you start poking all on one side, it's going to get very flat, like he got squished by a rock. There was an avalanche, and the tiger got squished. So you want to always be kind of rotating it. I don't know if I've said this yet, but these needles do break if you are going too hard or you're going in and bending. It's not a big deal. The needles themselves aren't that expensive. If you break like 1 million of them, that's a different story. But if they break, don't just throw them out in your trash can. It's like throwing out glass. You don't want to just chuck it in there because someone could like grab the bag and hurt themselves. You want to put it in something. All right, so I am starting to get on my tiger. See if I turn it, you can see this muzzle is much tighter felted. I still need to do some more, but I'm really starting to get that shape. And I could use my fingers to kind of poke things around if I need to visualize it. Tigers don't have super long muzzles. I was looking at some photos. I just thought Pleasantdale Tigers make a tiger. Thought that was pretty appropriate.
Is this how it should look?
Let me, yes. So you're going to keep poking, and we can always do more sculpting as we go. But once you have your two pieces ready, you're going to connect the head to the neck. And he's going to kind of, you know, he almost looks like a duck right now. And you're going to stab the two together to hold them. And then to attach things, we're just poking from one into the other. So that's why I left it a little loose on that head, because I'm kind of poking the head into the body. Poking the head into the body, and then I can poke the body into the head. So I don't want to poke it straight in. I want to kind of poke it at an angle. So that's why I like to use the helper needle, because it's real easy to get a little too excited. And then once it's staying, you could take your helper needle out, and then it lets you kind of rotate. So you're going to kind of start to say, oh, looks pretty good. I left this guy a little too soft, so I'm going to poke under his chin a little and define that area. Pretty good. Feel like I want this part to kind of come up a little bit straighter. So I'm going to kind of angle him, and I'm going to poke in. And this is, again, where you got to be real careful. And the angle that you're poking, make sure you're not at risk of poking in. So that's pretty good, except that now my guy looks like he's up sniffing the air. So did you see how the angle of my head changed? So I kind of want him to be looking forward a little more. So to pull this back down, I need to push right here where my nail is, right? So in order to get that to happen, all I have to do is poke him repeatedly in that spot. And real quickly, my head is now much more forward. Now, if he gets too small in any one area, like right now, we don't have a good smooth area from his back. Like his neck gets a little tight from assembling him. And we're going to kind of do this with the orange, but we can use small pieces of fluff and kind of, you know, put a piece in if we want to make it smoother. I'm actually going to wait on mine. Sometimes you don't know exactly how you want the shape. Oh yeah, that looks great, Nicholas.
Thank you.
All right. Because the nice thing about this sponge is that it's your soft surface, because if you were needling into a hard surface, it would snap the needle. But it also has like a nice little amount of friction for rolling small things. So I'm going to take the other piece of white and I'm going to divide it in half sideways. And then I'm going to divide each half into 2 equal pieces just by separating it. Okay, so I can get 4 approximately equal leg size pieces. Now, one thing that I want you to notice about the wool is that if you're separating it to the side, the pieces come apart really good. If you try to separate it lengthwise, it's much harder because each hair of the sheep is about 3 inches long. And so you can really, like I'll show you with this guy, if I tug on this in the middle and I'm going really hard, you can see my knuckles are white. It's not separating, but it will separate this way really easy. So when you actually go to separate, you actually have to put your hands farther apart and then the fibers will separate better. But right now we just want 4 equal parts for the legs. And we're not like measuring them, but like if one ended up really fat, just pull a piece off another one and add it. They just stick. Okay. And then what I was talking about with the sponge and the friction is that when we're rolling these, and you have your 4 equal pieces, you're going to kind of separate it into like a little rectangle-ish. It's going to be kind of rounded, but I kind of like pulled the fabric out so that I can then roll another cylinder, just like we did for the body. And so the secret to having less needling to do is to roll it really tight. And so when I'm rolling it really tight, the sponge is helping to hold it in place. And then where it gets too fluffy at the end, you want to fold it over. And that part, when you end up folding it over, on the one end, it's going to end up making a nice paw. Whereas this end, I'm going to leave fluffy so that I have some flexibility in where I connect it to the tiger. And if you rubbed it on the sponge, that friction of rolling it back and forth has already started to tangle the fibers. So it should stay pretty tight. Bigger pieces don't have as much of the friction. And I'm just going to needle it gently up and down the leg a little bit, just to start to condense it. Like if I want my tiger to actually stand, then I need my legs to get pretty firm. And they get firm by needling. And then after today, guys, I'm going to go ahead and put you all in my Schoology group for better updates. Sometimes I forget. And so before I attach anything, and I'm eventually going to kind of separate his foot out a little bit here, but I have to first decide if he's going to be laying or standing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make 3 more legs. And I think for this guy, I might actually try to make this guy that I'm making today standing. Because I made the other guy laying. And I don't remember who asked it, but Rose, I think maybe. I gave you both a little sample of blue and green so you could choose how to make their eyes, because animal eyes, tiger eyes, I think are a bluish green. You can almost blend the colors. So I made my rectangle and I'm gonna roll the wool, fold it, roll it. And I actually picked up a little bit of green that was on my sponge. before I start needling, I'm gonna pull that back off. So the thing with legs or anything round like this, you gotta make sure you poke evenly. So you're gonna like roll him a little. Because if you get too like needle happy on one side of his leg, then he's gonna be flat. Like a tank came through and rolled over his leg. Excuse me. That yawn snuck up on me. Um,
On this
Yes.
though,
the other thing you'll notice when you do your legs is that if you poke repeatedly, the fiber is going to get embedded in the sponge. So it pulls right out, but if you were to do that, occasionally I have students that poke in the same area too long, and then the fibers get really tangled in the sponge. So you always want to make sure you're kind of picking up and moving it. Mrs. Thalgy is working on her own needle felting project. And so she's working on a black surface and she flipped it over and she's like, well, what can I do? The fibers are all in the back. And I'm like, well, that's the whole essence. Is a lot of times the back of the artwork is going to, also have the felting in it because it's pushing the fibers, fully tangling them all the way through.
Does it matter how long the legs are? Like, how long are the legs on your tiger?
Well, mine are, I guess, almost as long as his body. Now, when I attach them, there's going to be some overlap. So, like the shoulders. I think I want to make this guy, my intent was to make him standing. You can also tuck under any fur. So, you're going to adjust the height to make sure they're even all the way around. So, mine weren't all that even. I didn't roll them all perfectly. For sure.
I have to go now. Bye.
No worries. Thanks, Rose. Make sure you put your needles in your sponge.
I am right now.
Awesome. Also, if you have dogs, they will like to eat these if there are any kind of hunter dog genes in there because it's sheep wool and they smell it. So my dogs always eat my sculptures. So be on the lookout. Awesome. So now I think for this guy, I want to make him standing. So all I did is I was actually just Googling tiger and looking at some different poses of them standing because I want to make sure I get my legs placed in the right spot. And I know that sounds weird, but it looks like for the tigers, their legs are really close to the front of their body. There's like a little tiny bit of chest, but they're pretty close. And then their back legs are kind of really back here. And they have a little thigh. So I'm probably going to have to get some more white and bulk that up a little bit. So their legs are about as long as their body is tall. So if his body, I don't know, say that's like 1 inch, that's about how tall his leg would need to be. So obviously if I went under like this, that would look really silly. So I would overlap, and that will kind of make that shoulder joint anyway, where the two come together. So I'm feeling like for this one, and I'm making sure my little paw is kind of forward, kind of like it there. So I would take my helper needle and stab it in. And when you're attaching something small like this, you start around the edges. Let me get these legs out of here just for the moment. So I'm poking around the edge, and then I'm filling in. So I started like around that edge, and I can always add more wool to any spot. So I find when I needle felt creatures, I like to tend to get the basic shape in and then go in and edit. I don't think you ever know exactly how something's going to turn out. That's just me. There's no one way to do it though. This foot was a little too floppy, so I went in and stabbed straight through the bottom pad, and it really flattened that out. That is just kind of a tricky needle because you don't want to jam it in. So I made sure my finger was on top. That could also be a good one for the helper needle, because you don't want to stab it into yourself. So I'm just going to continue to put his legs on. I'm using the edge of my sponge so I can kind of flatten his foot before I put it on, because that's way easier. And obviously his front leg should be about the same length as his back leg. Otherwise he'd be having a really rough day, be limping. And I will tell you the ears are a crucial detail. So don't stress if you're not feeling that he looks tigery enough. There's like crucial details. That really make your tiger come alive, and the ears are one of them. See, like this leg had a little bump here. Looks like he twisted an ankle. It's much easier to felt on the legs before they're attached if it's something you need to rotate around. And so pretty much right now my tiger is going to look like fairly generic. It almost could turn into a dog from here, could turn into a cat, could turn into a lot of different animals at this point. So it's all going to be about the details. The tail is another important detail.
Is this good?
Yeah. Now you guys don't have to make your standing. I had the other four kind of just pointing forward on this guy if you want him laying. So there's no real right or wrong way. I just thought I'd make them different so I don't have two that look exactly alike. And then I want to kind of test them out, see if he stands. I guess I lost, you know. So he's kind of standing pretty good there. If he was lopsided, I feel like this one back foot is a little too short. I can always put some more white. So if you need to stop by the art room or put a request in, you could just Schoology me if you need more felt. Those who are in art class, you're familiar with this process.
Is this good?
Oh yeah. Avery, go ahead.
The tip of my needle broke. Where should I put it?
Okay, so what I would do is the bigger piece of the needle, just stick it back in your sponge. It's that little sharp piece that broke off. If that's loose, you don't want to just throw it in the trash can because you don't want someone to like grab the bag and, you know, poor garbage man gets impaled with a needle piece. So like if you have like, I don't know, wrap it, like even like corrugated cardboard, if you have a scrap, you could slide it in there or something.
Okay.
I would ask your parents how you do it, but like it's however you would dispose of, like if you broke some glass, how would you throw it out, you know, type of thing. And then we're just about out of time here. So if you want to work ahead, I'll just show you real quickly how you start with the orange. And then if you want to work ahead, you can. And then otherwise, we're going to resume these Thursday and Monday. I will say that this group was much smaller and much, therefore, oh, my battery's almost dead. Let's see. There we go. So it was a lot easier. My other group, there was a lot, like 20 kids. And so didn't feel quite so relaxing, at least not to me. But you're just taking very thin pieces of the orange and you're kind of wrapping it around. So their bellies, I'm gonna go back to my photo, but I'm almost positive that their bellies get white. They do. So, but what they do is they're not like a perfectly smooth line. So I'm gonna kind of form that where I want. And I'm gonna kind of needle around the edges. Kind of poke that into his belly. And then you would just gently kind of poke and wrap. So needle felting, the basic premise is you make your shape, needle it, attach the next shape, needle it. And you just keep going. But yeah, I mean, if you feel like your neck wasn't quite smooth enough, you know, like mine has a little dip in there, I can just take and make him like a little orange scarf there to kind of smooth that out. So now I don't see that dip anymore. And then from there, this is tricky. You got to use your helper needle. You'd make little ears and a tail. So we'll go through all this step by step next week. The big thing is make sure you don't lose your needles and make sure you don't forget to put them in your sponge. So like if you leave them out on the table, they get knocked aside easily because they blend in well. Next thing you know, someone's got a needle in their foot.